Ghost guns is a relatively new term used by the gun control industry to make guns seem more dangerous and sinister than they really are. We're going to talk about that next with Rob Pincus. But first, if you have legal matters that involve firearms, then you need to call our California firearms lawyer, John Dillon. If you have questions about red flag laws, gun registration, gun transportation, or maybe you just need to know that your guns are California compliant, call our trusted firearms attorney, John Dillon. John Dillon specializes in California gun laws. Call 760-642-7150 or visit our website, DillonLawGP.com. So I guess the only reason I brought up the Josie Wells, I wanted to see if it was going to take us off air. Because we did Red Dawn, we got whacked.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess we'll see. It might be early.
So I was just checking. All right. So do we have Rob on the line? Hey, Rob, how's it going, buddy?
Great. How you guys doing?
Well, we're just living the dream in this lovely free state of California.
Doing great. Welcome to the show, Rob.
Yeah, look forward to it.
Was it King since I was there last time?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, I'm just trying to be positive. You know how that goes.
I do. I appreciate you guys having me back on. I'll be back in California this summer teaching as usual on the tour. And, it's always important to spend some time where it isn't as free, I think, to make sure we're paying attention to what the fight is. And I appreciate all the work you guys do locally and obviously nationally to educate people about what those problems really are and why we have to fight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it helps. Gives you a little perspective there. Lets you appreciate things a little bit. But,
yeah, and one of the things that I appreciate, when I am in California, one of the things I appreciate is how hard so many people do fight to exercise their rights, even with, restricted, like I heard, you gave a plug for someone that helps people figure out if their guns are compliant.
Mm-hmm.
Quite frankly, someone that's exercising their Second Amendment rights in New York, New Jersey, California, Massachusetts, in a way, you guys earn those rights more every day than the average guy in Arizona or California, Texas, pick your state.
Yeah, without a doubt.
All right, so good. Hey, Rob, I heard you had a birthday yesterday. Is that right?
I did.
You're like 37 now.
I heard he was 22.
Yeah, something like that.
I finally turned 50. I feel like, some of these old-timers that have been teaching since the Vietnam era won't call me kid anymore maybe now. I don't know.
I love that. I finally turned 50. When's the last time you heard a 50-year-old say, I finally... What, were you looking forward to it?
Well, you got to remember, I started teaching full-time. I was running classes. I took over the Valhalla Training. We launched, really, the Valhalla Training Center, took over the club that preceded it in my late 20s. So I showed up, running curricula and developing programs and teaching a lot of people who had a lot more, experience as armed professionals than I had very early on because of our training methodologies and our approach to training. Obviously there were people that found that valuable, but a lot of times the guys would show up like, who is this kid? Obviously in the industry, it's the same kind of thing. Like, who's this guy that didn't spend 20 years in law enforcement before he dared to hang up a shingle and say he was an instructor? So, I was kind of glad when I went gray and, whatever else. I was doing everything I could not to look 13. So it's not something I've dreaded. Quite honestly, it gets me closer to the day that I do pass the torch to lots of those instructors out there who are prepared to probably go much further than I have.
Wow, that's amazing. So what are we going to talk about today?
Well, you guys started talking about ghost guns, and we just ran the second annual Gunmakers Match, the National Gunmakers Match down in Florida last weekend. I'd love to tell you about that.
Yeah, what's that all about?
So we started this last year. The first Gunmakers Match was held in June in St. Augustine, Florida, and it was the first gathering of gun builders, private gun makers, people from the 3D printing side, people from the kit building side, and then obviously there's a few people out there who are using more, what I would say are more in line with traditional manufacturing or commercial manufacturing techniques where they're actually milling guns and milling their own receivers. It's something that is legal to do one way or another in, I think, currently 44 states. There are regulations on doing it in about 15 states. So California, for example, is one of the places where it's pretty heavily regulated, but it is legal to do. Massachusetts is another state where it's pretty regulated, but it's legal to do. And we actually ran a regional gun makers match last year, late in December, up in Massachusetts at Cape Gun Works. But the second annual match, again, brought people from the West Coast, the Midwest, the Northeast, down to Florida. People from all over the country competed in 3 different divisions inside of 2 categories. So one category is 3D printed based firearms, and the other is kit built firearms. And we put the milled guns, the few guys that show up with them, in with the 3D printed guns because they are truly starting from raw materials like the 3D printers do. And they compete in handgun, PCC or braced pistol, and rifle categories. And it's sort of like an action shooting match. If you think of an IDPA or USPSA stage, they compete on multiple stages. We score it just like, an IDPA match would be scored, something along those lines. Best 2 hits count, and you're penalized for poor hits. Your score is your time plus penalties. And then we award some plaques and we give away some great prizes. And everybody, just about everybody, I think, has a great time. And we hope that everybody gets what they expect out of the match. And this year it was a big success. The event is actually sanctioned by Guns for Everyone National, the 501c3 arm of Guns for Everyone, based here in Colorado, where I am right now at my Western headquarters. And it's also co-sponsored or really helped to organize the event is a group called Are We Cool Yet? The Aussie group, AWCY, and they are a community that develops 3D printed guns, designs, and supports people who are getting into the hobby, and even new designers who are developing truly unique firearms based on 3D printed technology.
Say, Rob, just for the listeners here, what's the difference between the kit guns and a 3D printed gun? Like, if I had 2 guns laying side by side here, one from a kit, one from a 3D print, could you tell the difference, or could you see a difference in them?
You probably could tell the difference with, I would say, 99% of the printed guns. The 99% of the printed guns, the quality of the print, that would have what we call layer lines. It would be pretty obvious that it wasn't a commercially made frame, that it would have more of a do-it-yourself kind of look in most cases. Now, I will tell you, some of the guys are doing some amazing things with some very high-tech filaments, the raw material that you use in 3D printer. They use higher temperatures. They use really incredibly precise machines in some cases to make some things that you really can't, especially at a glance or when you first pick it up, you can't tell the difference between some of these guns and whether it's a kit build or a commercially made firearm. Now, the kit built guns, we're talking about companies like Polymer 80 or SS80 that's based right there in California. Those kits really are going through exactly the same injection molding process using very similar polymers or plastics to what Glock or Smith & Wesson or SIG use in their polymer framed guns. So those will look and feel much more like a commercially made firearm, especially if you really don't know what you're looking at when it comes to the 3D printed guns.
And how are the 3D printed guns, how are they in terms of reliability and wear?
Yeah.
It's a little bit, it's completely safe if you do it, obviously, if you do it properly. Like anything else, if you do it improperly, it could be a little less safe. You have to remember, almost all of the guns that people are, quote unquote, 3D printing, what we are 3D printing is the frame of the gun. So, in that answering the last question, I was really picturing, a typical Glock style handgun, either made with a kit or made with a 3D printer. Now, if you talk about 3D printing some of the very unique guns, the guns that can only be 3D printed because there are no kits, they obviously don't look like anything else, on the market or in the community. So those stand out. And then again, if the print quality is high enough, it'll look commercially manufactured. If the print quality is typical, it'll look a little more home-built, do-it-yourself. In terms of reliability, that home-built, do-it-yourselfness can be a factor in the kits as well as the 3D printing. So if your pinholes aren't straight, if your rails aren't smooth, it's just like when we, I don't know if you were ever involved in, custom building your own 1911s, but back in the 90s when I was doing that, if you didn't file everything right, if it wasn't polished properly, that gun wasn't going to operate smoothly and reliably either. So all of those pitfalls are there. With the kits, it is a little bit more be patient and follow the instructions and it'll work. With the 3D printing, if you're using a design that's put out there by one of the well-known designers or one of the groups like Aussie, if you're getting your designs from someplace like DefCAD, it's probably a well-vetted design. If you don't mess with it, you'll be able to print it out, install the parts, and be shooting a gun. But these guns, most of the guns that people are using uppers, whether it's slides and barrels or AR-15 type uppers that are commercially made. So they're buying the commercially made parts that are not, serialized, that aren't controlled items, and they're making their own frames. So they end up with an unserialized, privately made firearm, whether it's a rifle, pistol, a braced pistol, but they're using a lot of commercial parts. On the other hand, there are people who are doing truly home-built guns. There are designs out there that are really impressive. I just recently put up a video of me shooting a Cobra 9, which was developed by a guy named Darren. He goes by Durwood in the printing community. It's his kind of code name. And it's an amazing design that is truly unique, and it has a recoil dampening system that is pretty innovative, and it shoots incredibly smoothly. Think MP5 style gun.
So the barrel itself is still steel? It's not?
Yeah, all the barrels, you can technically 3D print a complete gun, but as you can imagine, unless it has an incredibly thick barrel, it's not actually survive the first couple of shots. So you could do something with like a rimfire, 22 short, maybe a 20 long rifle. But for the 99.9% of the guns out there, 99.999% of the guns out there have either traditional barrels or barrels that are made through a process called electrochemical machining, where you actually combine some 3D printing techniques and an electrochemical process with a salt bath, and you can imagine some electricity and some twisted copper wires to give you rifling inside of high-grade steel. So you can make your own barrels and truly have a gun that has no commercial parts whatsoever.
Well, the reason I bring it up, unfortunately, is the left listens to our show all the time. And if you could make a usable, all plastic or all, which you could get through an airport security and all that, what'll break loose. So I wanted to make sure that that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's not what we're talking about. You got to remember, that fear-mongering is going to be there, that misunderstanding.
Well, I know, but if I get out there and say it, then they can't come back at us and say, well, you said that you're making guns, and no, get a life.
Yeah, and there is the Undetectable Firearms Act is still in effect, that law that went into effect in the late 80s that said no firearm can be undetectable.
Right.
That's still a thing. And just to put everybody at ease, while I said, you could make a firearm theoretically that might last a shot or two without using traditional parts, you have to remember the bullets, if they're going to be dangerous to people, are still going to be made of metal, and they're still going to be findable on those scanners, magnetometers, or the much more advanced scanners that TSA is using.
All right. Rob, can you hang with us for another segment?
Absolutely.
You're the best. Hey, you want to get a pilot's license? Go ahead. It's on your bucket list. Just look. But if you're going to do it, make that dream come true at San Diego Flight Training International. Hey, we're so excited to welcome San Diego Flight Training International as a new sponsor. You can learn to fly, start the adventure of a lifetime in the heart of San Diego, right in Montgomery Field. Getting started is super easy. Give them a call, 858-569-1822. You can learn to fly with SDFTI. Call them today, 858-569-1822. 1822. Get trained by the professionals. All right, we got Rob Pincus on the line. We've just been sort of chatting about the infamous ghost guns. But you know what? I when I was listening to you talk about that event in Florida, it kind of reminded me of the custom hot rod community. How people just will take a four-wheel vehicle and turn it into things that would blow you away. And it sounds to me like you must have come out with some pretty interesting guns at that event.
Oh, yeah. People can go to gunmakersmatch.com and see some of the pictures and see some of the links to some of the media coverage that we've gotten in the past. The media coverage from the second event is starting to come out. We had one video with a bunch of great interviews with some of the competitors, some of the organizers, and lots of good video of the shooting and the guns themselves come out on an international feed. Actually, we had a crew there from a German-based news source that gave us a really nice, no editorial, no commentary about crazy Americans with evil guns or any of that, just a very fair showing of what we were doing and mostly let us talk about it. We've got a piece coming out, a little mini documentary from Newsy, and last year Vice News did a great documentary. People can find it if they search Gunmakers Match, 3D printed Gunmakers Match through Vice News. It's about a 30-minute piece, and we actually had a journalist make his own gun. He was from California. He made his own gun, competed in the match, and then he had to destroy the gun at the end of the show because he didn't want to take it back to California, and he obviously couldn't legally take it back to California because he didn't get the serial number first. This year, we had a journalist make her own gun. She had never shot a handgun before. She made a gun, she shot it, and she actually took possession of it and took it home with her. She is now a new gun owner because of the gun makers match. And that's one of the things we're trying to get people to do. Obviously, for some people, they just love crafts. They love working. They're machinists. Yeah. They're creators. They work with their hands. We're woodworking, as you mentioned, car customization, whatever it might be. Plenty of people who are just technically good at 3D printing have gotten into guns because it's such a technical challenge. And now the gun makers match gives them a place to show off their work.
Well, and Rob, people have been making guns since
the beginning.
Guns. So what's the argument against being allowed to build your own gun? I mean, why would you argue against that, or why would people argue against that?
Yeah, obviously, I'm not arguing against that. I think it comes down to right now in the gun control community. If we look at President Biden, if we look at the kind of normal, the regular actors in the gun control world, they have lost and or been pushed back on so many fronts. Even the gun control community, you're starting to have people like the most recent past president of the Brady campaign organization who has come right out and said, like, magazine bans aren't the way to go. Assault weapons ban, it doesn't even mean anything. It's not the way to go. It's not where anybody should be putting their energy because it doesn't really create anything worth infringing on people's rights. So one of the pieces of low-hanging fruit I think that the gun control community perceives right now is to cast a very negative light on the idea of private gun making somehow only being about keeping the government out of guns, which quite frankly they shouldn't be. We know that, but that can be turned into a nefarious concept by the gun control community. And this idea that the only reason you would make a gun that doesn't have a serial number is for criminal intent, because let's face it, most people get their information about guns from movies and TV, and on TV, tracing a gun is this magic way to solve all crimes. And I can assure you, based on my own personal law enforcement experience and, obviously talking to a lot of other law enforcement professionals over the years, tracing a gun is not something that solves very many crimes in the way it does on TV. So it can be cast as a negative thing very easily. And again, that's one of the missions of the gun makers match, is to show who's really involved in this. It's some of the most responsible, most educated gun owners who are incredibly passionate about safety. Even when it comes down to our inspection table, we inspect all of the privately made guns that come into the gun makers match. Well, they have to be inspected before they can be used in competition because we want to make sure they're safe. And we want to make sure people are building them responsibly. And the kind of guys that are into gun making, overwhelmingly, again, they are the most conscientious and responsible gun owners.
Well, so, and Rob, just based on the people that you interact with and what you've heard, have you heard a lot about the criminal use of homemade guns or anything nowadays?
Well, I hear a lot. I get asked a lot of questions by journalists. They'll say things like, well, the seizure of ghost guns is up 400% in some jurisdiction or another. And I always, challenge them to push back on wherever they're getting these statistics from, because we know that the term ghost gun, if all it means is an untraceable gun, well, that could be a lot of things. It could be a gun manufactured before 1968 and sold legally that wasn't required to have a logged serial number with the federal government. It could mean a privately made gun. It could mean a gun that a criminal took the serial number off of because they had criminal intent and did something wrong with it. And that's been going on. I remind you, my dad was a narcotics detective in the 70s, right? I have pictures of him, from newspaper clippings with stacks of cash, drugs, and guns that had the serial numbers filed off. I mean, this is the idea that criminals take serial numbers off of guns is nothing new. Those are ghost guns in the vernacular that most law enforcement would use that term. And also remember that in most states, private sales are legal. So in most states, the second time a gun gets sold from one gun owner to another responsible gun owner, it is now technically untraceable. I always advise people, if you privately sell a gun, you should get a bill of sale and you should see the person's ID, preferably a concealed carry permit or something like that, so you're selling it to a responsible gun owner. But there's no legal obligation to do that, nor should there be. So it's very possible that a gun can be traced in many states from the manufacturer to the wholesaler to the retailer to the first customer, and the first customer can tell the cops when they knock on the door, oh, I sold that to somebody 8 years ago and I don't have the paperwork or I don't remember the paperwork or, unless you have a warrant, I'm not going to tell you who I sold it to. And that's completely legal, and that makes that gun a ghost gun too. So whenever I hear these statistics, I always have to challenge the journalists and anybody else who's concerned about them. Are the guns you're hearing about actually privately made guns? And are they being used in violent crimes, or are these just incidental confiscations because of possession, during a DUI arrest? And I'm not saying DUI is okay. I'm just saying confiscating a gun during a DUI arrest is not the same as someone going into a movie theater and shooting people with a gun. And we're just not seeing a lot of violent crime with privately made guns. In fact, for one of the chiefs of police here in Denver, where I'm sitting right now at my Western HQ, I can no longer possess or manufacture unserialized guns as of the first week in January. It's a new law. It's a law that I'm fighting, and some other people or some other big organizations are looking at backing some lawsuits against the city. But one of the chiefs of police and someone from the crime lab did one of the city council meetings when they were discussing this potential restriction, and they told them, they said, we as the police department have seen no significant number of these unserialized guns and none involved in any violent crimes here in the city or county of Denver. And yet the city council still passed the restriction.
Right. So let me ask you this. I mean, just so we can make this a little bit more understandable to say to the folks listening to the show that are not into guns. And I don't know if you asked this question at your conference. How long does it take to make this gun, a ghost gun, shall we call it, from A to Z? A week, 2 weeks, a month? I mean, you see where I'm going with this?
I do. And so let me put it to you this way, and I'm going to tell you why I think this is an important thing to talk about. I don't think it's important from the aspect that most people ask, as if somehow it's not as bad if it takes a long time. I think that's how most people ask. So if you talk about 3D printing a gun, it could take you literally 40 to 50 hours to print the parts of the gun that you then have to file and clean up and sand and fix, that you then have to assemble the parts. Some of these guns that are truly do-it-yourself require welding skills in addition to 3D printing skills. You've got to file and polish the metal pieces that you've created. You've got to assemble all the parts, and it literally can take a couple weeks of work just to get to where you're testing the gun at the range, and then you might have to fiddle with it a little bit to make it reliable. That's at the extreme end. These kit-built guns, the Glock-style pistol kits, if you laid all the parts out, of course, that means you had to go to the store or mail order all the parts and all these other things that are legal to own without having to go through a background check and all that stuff. If you had all the parts and all the tools laid out on a table and you hit a stopwatch, I absolutely 100% guarantee that I could get a working gun going within an hour. I'm sure there are people out there that could probably reliably, they'll tell you they bet $100 they could do it in 30 or 40 minutes. Mm-hmm. Now, that being said, and this is why I think this is important to talk about, I don't hide that. When Biden or Schumer or somebody says you can get these parts off the internet and build a gun in 30 minutes, I ask you, gun control advocate, what's the appropriate amount of time? Like, what are you going to be satisfied with? Are you going to tell me that if it took 3 hours, you wouldn't care? If it took 3 weeks, you wouldn't care? If it took 3 months, you wouldn't care? I don't think that's the case. So I think it's a disingenuous attack. It's not as if, well, if it took an hour, it'd be okay. But the fact that it takes 30 minutes, that's really a problem. That's not freedom. It shouldn't matter how long it takes. Some guys, that build kit airplanes or as you mentioned, hot rods, they have those things in their garage for years.
Sure.
They hit the road with them or they hit the runway with them. Other people might do it in a month. I think for the handgun or the rifle, we got to remember you can go buy one with an instant background check in almost every state in this country. So the idea that you can walk into a store with the same amount of money you're going to spend and walk out the door with the gun has to be remembered and has to be talked about. The fact is we're advocating for shall not be infringed.
Right.
How long it takes to build the gun really shouldn't need to be part of the discussion.
And if you're a crook, you can get it in 15 minutes if you know where to go.
Well, that's just it. When you look at what goes into building these guns, every journalist who's gone hands-on to build a gun, every journalist has come to the same conclusion. Wow, this is a lot of work. I can't imagine the criminal wanting to go through this when they could just go buy a gun for cash.
So that's why that argument, doesn't hold water. When you hear these people talk about, up 400%, it sounds like there's just thousands of criminals making guns.
Well, see, and that's why I'm always skeptical when I hear those kinds
Right.
of. Well, because one up 400% could mean we got 1 last year and we got 4 this year.
Yeah.
Right.
But for that same
That's a
reason,
good
though,
point.
I mean, criminals. Why would you go through all that when it's much, much easier just to go buy a stolen gun?
I know but it doesn't make any difference because they're doing everything humanly possible to get the guns taken away. I don't know if you heard the law that just got failed in the schools, where the schools wanted the kids to rat on their parents about gun ownership.
Oh, I did, and I'm glad that one went away.
Yeah.
That was incredibly ridiculous.
Yeah, well, maybe that's a bright light, or maybe a little light in California, because that was a shocker. Rob, this has been a blast. Thank you very much for chatting with Joe and I, and we always look forward to talking to you down the road.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. And we need to spend some range time together when I'm out in California next time.
Let's do it.
Looking forward to it.
All right, buddy. Hey, how do people follow you and stay on top of what you're doing?
They can follow me at Pincus Rob, Pincus Rob, at Twitter or Instagram, and they can just use my name on the social medias, any of them. They'll find me, and gunmakersmatch.com for more information on that event.
I'm definitely going to go check that one out. I can't wait to see what that's all about. Thanks, buddy. You have a good next week.
Thanks for watching this clip from Gun Owners Radio. You can watch us live every Sunday from 4 to 6 p.m. California time, right here on our YouTube channel, or if you're in the San Diego area, you can listen to us on 1170 a.m. We're also available on your favorite podcast platform for free. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that you can help restore and protect the Second Amendment, not just in California, but across the country.